Hey kids, it's Jurassic James, and on this Jurassic James Explains, we're looking at dinosaur names. Now, you're wondering why there's so many species here. Um, if you notice my website, when I have dinosaur models on display, I always have the name meaning below the name itself because it's so important to like learn how they're connected. And a lot of times when I talk to parents and particularly grandparents too, they're always like, my kid, they're little. They're always like, they really know these names, these long names, and the idea is names are actually Greek and Latin because paleontology is the science, and like not only in dinosaur world, but also in general, biologists used to just name everything, and the whole name was the description of the animal. And it turns out that's very complicated. And we found out that there were sometimes the same species being given different long names in different parts of the world. So what Carl Linnaeus did was he came along and said, no, two name system, genus and species, and everything else, the class, order, family, all that stuff, that's kind of describing the group, basically, right? So when I tell you about a bear, I shouldn't tell you it's a mammal, that's a class, that's settled. The genus and species describe the animal's location or where it's from or its features. That being said, but our dinosaurs here are prehistoric creatures. There's non-dinosaurs here too. Um, these guys here, their names are features on the animal. These guys here, their names are locations, and these guys have names that are either um, behavioral or like cultural meaning based on where it's from. So the earliest example of this is the Ichthyosaurus. Now, Ichthyosaurs are not dinosaurs; they're marine reptiles, which covered that in a previous video. But the idea is that it is a reptile. The bones are reptilian, but they're in the shape of a fish. So ichthyosaur means fish, lizard. If you study fish, you're ichthyologist. Saurus, of course, like dinosaur, terrible lizard. And this was first named, I believe, in 1821. So it's pretty straightforward, right? The next name, or the first dinosaur named by science, was Megalosaurus by Thomas Buckland. And the idea is that Megalosaurus means big lizard. Megalo, large or big, saurus, lizard. The word dinosaur wasn't coined until 1842. This is 1824, right? Reverse the last numbers. Uh, they didn't understand the idea of where dinosaurs were at the time. They didn't have a name for them. They saw these large bones. They were like, what is this kind of thing? The second dinosaur named, interesting enough, is Iguanodon, one of my favorites, top three favorites. Iguanodon means iguana tooth, like the word don, like dentist. So the idea here is that they found a tooth about that, get it in a tail, like found a tooth about this big, and or his wife, depending on which version you read. I think it was her, but anyway, the idea was a tooth like an iguana tooth, and iguanas are actually herbivorous reptiles, but it was bigger. So again, the idea was like Megalosaurus is some large animal here that's reptilian, so iguanodon. This is a very new version of this animal. It's changed a lot in our minds. Other names, again, like I said, these are all feature-based. So the name Pachycephalosaurus means pachy, thick, cephallo, head, saurus, lizard, because their skulls are like 6 inches thick. We mainly find their skulls anyway. But the idea is that that's something that's a very unique feature. If you say that no other dinosaur has that, or no other group has that. As far as features go, kind of more vaguely, is Centosaurus. So in Europe, the first sauropod long neck found was Centosaurus. Cento, the root word is like cetacean. So think whales and dolphins, they're called cetaceans. So saurus means lizard, because it's like a whale lizard. It's a large thing, right? When paleontologists went to North America, we found Brontosaurus. Now, Brontosaurus means thunder lizard because one, it's the biggest dinosaur at the time we knew of. Second, I know the word Brontosaurus' toy is actually Brontosaurus. What I'm saying is, not going over the bone wars, but essentially the skeletons they were naming partial parts of the original one that was the Rhinosaurus. People have come back and studied and said, actually, it's its own species. So this model represents that belief, to my understanding. So Brontosaurus being one of the largest animals at the time, thunder lizard. It walked so, the ground was shaking and all that, right? That's not actually true, though. Their feet had pads on them, which made them reduced. Kind of like elephants, how they walk, and they can be silent. Anyway, off topic. So another one we have is called Camarasaurus, a lesser-known sauropod. It's the most common sauropod in late Jurassic North America. And Camarasaurus is special to me because I actually dug up some of these guys. This is really important to me. But Camarasaurus means chambered lizard because they have hollow bones in their vertebrae. And in fact, when I was digging, the tail bones are very thick and solid. The neck bones are very hollow and thin. So that makes them lighter, and they have air stacks and things. So the name means that. Here we have Brachiosaurus, the arm, meaning arm lizard. The arms are longer than the legs. That's why the slope upward of his back. So the idea is that that name, again, applies to those features. One of the more obvious dinosaur names is Spinosaurus because it means long, these neural spines are 6 feet tall, and that stands out, obviously, like literally stands out. And of course, it sounds very similar in English, Spinosaurus or spine lizard. Now, I think last week or week before last, I went over Ceratosaurus, a horned lizard, because it's the first dinosaur found with any kind of head crest structure earlier on, 1889. Sorry, 84. 89 was Triceratops, which three-horned face, which is ironic because there are other dinosaurs with three-horned faces, actually. There's a lot, there's Pterodactylus, there's Regaliaceratops, there's Utaceratops here, so, and many other Chasmosaurus in that family. But Triceratops was the first one found, and consequently the largest one found, so the name kind of sticks with that guy. Pentaceratops means five-horned face. It's because they have the main three, the two of the brow, nose. These two cheek parts here are horns, so it's five. How do you go bigger than Triceratops? Five-horned face. A newer discovery is Regaliaceratops, and this guy has three horns as well, but has this kind of like these frill spines here, and the idea that's like a regalia, very opulent. Another ceratopsian that I just love this name is Diabloceratops, which means devil lizard, because the horns coming out they like devil horns and all the mythical and And I remember this is my first one and it has red eyes. That's kind of interesting that they chose their red eyes. The other figures I have of this species don't have that feature. They have the horns, not the actual red eyes, which is of course speculation. There's one called Euplocephalus, meaning well-armored head, because this guy had bony plates on his skull and even more over the eyelids. Kind of a cool example of that for the Ankylosaurus. We have Setacosaurus, which I did a video on that one before too, which name means parrot lizard. Whoops. So, I mean, again, this one has a lot of feathers here, but they're about, on the table, standing here, be about that tall, like this tall, about that long, 6 feet long almost. But the idea is that, like a parrot, the beak, little side ridges. Pterodactyl, or actually Pterodactylus is the actual genus, discovered and reviewed by, reviewed by George Cuvier, the father of paleontology, vertebrate paleontology. Ptero meaning wing, dactyl meaning finger, because again, our hands, there's the 1, 2, 3 main fingers, and then the ring finger for us is the actual long piece going out here. And the reason pterodactyl is so popular is because it was the first pterosaur recognized in science. We later found, and they were all called pterodactyls as a general thing, and then they found that like Trianon and Tibihara, these guys had different head crests, and the name pterosaur was coined because they're different species, basically. But pterodactyl was the first one, so the name kind of stuck. And that's true of many groups where they first remember that group, like the Spinosaurus family, their Spinosaur, first one kind of known really, or at least they all tie them together and say, hey, this guy's really well known, he's going to be the family name. One kind of a weird story is this guy here. This is Edmontosaurus from Edmonton, Canada, and here's an Anatitan. And an Anatitan was depicted in Walking with Dinosaurs, the BBC version, like 1999. Well, it turns out an Anatitan means, anana meaning the genus for ducks, and titan means giant, so it means giant duck. It's the term duck bill. Well, it turns out that they now consider, a paper was written, and an Anatitan is actually just a species of Edmontosaurus now. So, fun fact there. Trianon, which is fun because the name Trianon means wing without teeth. And this is like one of the few Trianon models I have with no teeth. I think because Jurassic Park put teeth in theirs, like Papo, they all did it too. This one's mouth is closed, so I'm using it for my example. But the idea is that they'll put teeth in this beak. It's like this genus does not have teeth. And the name literally is no teeth. Wing with no teeth. Sorry, getting a little excited. So one more obvious example of this naming process, we have Monolophosaurus, meaning one, lopho, crest, saurus, lizard. There's one crest right here in his head. Its distant cousin, is Dilophosaurus, the quote spitter from Jurassic Park. There's two crests there. And then they have another relative in South Antarctica called Coelophysis, meaning frozen crested lizard. And the idea is that these early Jurassic species all had like kind of crest structures. Found in Antarctica, so the name represents the crest that's frozen because it's in the cold. But it's not as cold back then as it was today. So anyway, Coelophysis, the early dinosaur from North America, means hollow form, and the idea is that this guy would be about that tall, standing next to me, 6 feet long, very thin and wiry, but had hollow bones, and that stood out because it was living around all these large crocodilian-like animals that have different bone structures, and these Thoraps, mammal-like reptiles. Different video, different time. So those hollow bones made it lighter, faster. Struthiomimus means essentially ostrich mimic. So if you saw the Gallimimus in Jurassic Park, it's like those guys, but it's a smaller relative in North America. And again, the name fits, right? So another example of this is, one of my favorite examples of this naming is that this guy, the genus is Sinosauropteryx, the species is Prima. Sino, Chinese, Saurus, lizard, Opteryx, wing and or finger. Prima means first. This is the first feathered dinosaur, like true dinosaur. I know Archaeopteryx is the first feathered like fossil thing found, but this guy is clearly it's in the Compsognathus family, the little compies in Jurassic Park, the little green guys. This is one of their cousins in China, and the idea that the name literally means first feathered dinosaur, or first winged dinosaur, from China. And as the story goes, people didn't believe those were feathers when they first found it on they were scales, and then they found Coelophysis, this neighbor and distant cousin, which means tail feather, called over to the tail vertebra. Opteryx meaning wing or feather, so tail wing, this guy here. So a couple other examples of feature names are Setacosaurus, which means roof lizard, because of plates like roof tile in the back. And last but not least, I have Baryonyx, and Baryonyx means heavy claw. So this is a Spinosaurus cousin from Britain, and it's really, where raptors have the big claw on their foot, they have a big claw on their hand, and it's something used for fishing, because they actually found a fish in a stomach. That's the connection there. So again, as I was preparing, I was pulling dinosaurs off the chart, the wall, to talk about, but I realized that, hey, I might run out of space, so I couldn't pull all of them. But I want to show you kind of a general overview of, like, these are the names that are found based on features. As far as location goes, it's far easier, and I think you should look at it this way, that in early paleontology, they're finding these weird things, they're not sure what they are exactly, so they're giving them names to tell you a feature on the animal. So you can see it, you know what it is, right? The fun thing about that is that if I'm reading a paper on a dinosaur, new genus, or something like that, I can see the name and go, okay, it must be this kind of animal, it must kind of have these features because of the name parts, right? Well, the location is much more different, because once you have a lot of just known species, you can start using location as an example. We have Utah Ceratops. I wonder where he's from. There's Utah Raptor. We saw, we always talk about Metaburosaurus from Australia. This is a walking dinosaurs version. Metaburus, Australia. Malawisaurus, my favorite Titanosaurus now. Amargasaurus. Now these are all, those are like towns and states and countries. Amargasaurus is a formation, the Amarga Formation. So that's where it's from. Makes sense. This next one is pronounced Niger. Well, actually, I've heard it say, my American tongue, or Texas tongue, says Nigersaurus, but it's pronounced Niger. People from there have told me it's pronounced Niger. I'm probably saying it wrong still, so don't hate me, please. But the idea is that Nigersaurus is from Niger, Africa, a country in Africa. And of course, Matthiakosaurus, Madagascar, from that region too. So again, these names are locations. Now, the last group are names that are either behavioral or I'll just get into it, cultural. So the behavioral one is more obvious. It's this guy, or this gal, I should say, here, called Myosaurus. So Myosaurus means good mother lizard, because they find the babies fossilized, the nest fossilized, and they don't nest to it. Again, telling dinosaur sex is hard sometimes, or maybe not, I don't know, depends on who you talk to in paleontology. But in general, we see an adult next to it, and the assumption is it's the mother. So Myosaurus, the first dinosaur given a feminine name. So that's kind of one cool thing as far as behavior goes. And again, it's this parenting. Now, many hadrosaurs were parents, but this is the first one we found the babies with the adults. So it's like, first. Like that thing people do on YouTube, they put first in the comment section. Another behavior one is Overraptor, which are found on Protoceratops eggs. They thought, until they realized they were actually Overraptor eggs in the 90s. Even though that particular site had the adult Overraptor on an Overraptor nest, it doesn't mean Overraptor itself didn't actually still eat eggs, because it has a really weird structure in his mouth, beak, these two little structures in this top of this palate that may have helped to punch your eggs, theoretically. But overall, it's a behavioral thing, or dietary thing in this case, I guess. Another example of names based on behavior. Actually, that's it. The next ones are based on, the last one I should say is Velociraptor, which as far as, we look at it and think Jurassic Park, but remember in context, it was like found in the 1920s, and Velociraptor didn't have a good agent until then. It was not very well known. The bones they had were very sparse, and the group are called Dromaeosaurus, right? And Dromaeosaurus itself was named before that, and they were just all small. And the idea is that Dromaeosaurus means running lizard, Velociraptor means quick thief. So they were all these small little dinosaurs, kind of like running around like coyotes, or they're the dinosaur equivalent to a coyote or a jackal, right? And it wasn't until the Deinonychus was found, the terrible claw, their cousin with the big claw, that they kind of took off. And then, of course, Jurassic Park took them away, and history, right? So that's another behavioral thing, where it's a faster animal because it's very thin and light, where most dinosaurs are carnivorous or no really large, right?
So the next group are going to be more cultural. So Matthiakosaurus here from Madagascar, I did a video on that one already. This guy, it's like some kind of it's named after a fearsome like spirit, and the culture's there. So sometimes paleontology you have to know not just the animal but also the animal's region, not only like where it's from, obviously, but what cultures are there. Another example of this is from South America. Tibihara is a very cool pterosaur. It means well-being. So it's one of those cultural terms like that. Um, Other examples of this can be just downright interesting because, for example, Protoceratops means like first or early Ceratopsian, because you look at Triceratops and all these North American species with horns and stuff, and you go to Asia, you see this guy here without any features like that, and you're like, well, he's supposed to be the earliest ancestor. We've now found better candidates of the ancestry of Ceratopsians. This is just like an offshoot, but it's still a simpler form, so the name kind of sticks like that. But that's an example of like our naming it based on where we thought it sat in the family tree, kind of thing. Of course, one of my favorite stories is Irritator. I did that video before, but the skull they found was taken by black market people, and they put on fake parts back of the skull. And when the actual scientists got a hold of it, they were pulling it apart, and they were like, "Oh, this is so annoying! It's irritating." Irritator, the genus name. And of course, my last example of this is don't fall over, please. Too much. We have Dilong, and Dilong means this is a Tyrannosaurus distant cousin in China about 110 million years ago, I believe. This guy here means Emperor's Dragon. So it's kind of like how we have behind me have Tyrannosaurus Rex, Tyrant Lizard King, being the largest predator of his time, largest predator discovered by the time, 1905. That name's very imposing, terrifying, giant jaws, giant teeth. Dilong being their Tyrannosaurian cousin, which was in debate for a while, but still kind of, D means emperor, and long means dragon. So one thing to point out too with this is a lot of the names are Latin and Greek, because paleontology as we know it started in Europe. And if you are French or British or German or whatever, you have your own language, but Latin is pretty universal. If you're of a certain group or class, you know a certain language. So the idea is that the names are Latin and Greek. So that's again why I can read a paper, this animal might have these features based on its name, right? Well, now in China, there's a boom paleontology, government-funded paleontology, I must add, and the idea is that why would they use our names? There are Western scientists working with people in China. The names, sometimes they're more familiar to the Latin and Greek connection, but Dilong, Guanlong, those are all names that refer to those cultures. So, I always tell students in paleontology, you have to learn geography, you have to learn history, you have to learn all these different things too. It's not just the dinosaurs themselves, right? So Dilong's an example of that. But the last example is the one that I find most frustrating, because when I was very young, I found out about something called Dinosaurus, this little hypsilophodont from Australia. And there was one found with it called Timimus, which is essentially like a Struthiomimus, but smaller. And I couldn't figure out what Lealiana meant in Latin or Greek. And it turns out it was the name of the scientist who found his daughter. And Tim was her son, Tim Mimic, So it turns out in science, it's not impossible. You shouldn't name a species after yourself. You technically could, but it's really frowned upon. It's very arrogant of you. So you can see one named after your friend. So before the Bone Wars, when Cook and Marsh were buddies, there's a Otheliosaurus, there's a Marsosaurus. Those names they named after their friends. That was cool back then, but before the war, the Paleo War. But naming after the reason it's weird to me is because there's a Triceratops named Lane and another one named Kelsey, and they're like siblings. And the people who found the Triceratops, that's their ranch on their land. So naming the individual specimen Lane or Kelsey, fine. But naming the species a person's name, that's really unusual. Not unusual. It's not super normal, I guess is the word. So for me as a kid, it was really frustrating trying to figure out what does Liana mean in Greek or Latin. Turns out it doesn't. Or maybe it does in some linguistics world. But the idea in general was that was very weird for me. So why is the actual genus name someone's first name? So in general, that's the overview of the dinosaur names and where they come from and how to learn them. The idea is that you have your names based on features, names based on location, and names based on either behavior or cultural ideas. So that being said, that is dinosaur names. If you like this kind of video, or you prefer the actual spotlight on one species, let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, comment, do whatever. By letting me know what you guys think or like, it tells me, oh yeah, this is, keep doing that, or like don't do that, because I'm just like spitballing what I like to talk about. And to me, I thought names are something important because people always bring up names to me. So here it is. But anyway, that being said, thank you very much, and I will see you guys next week.